I am so excited for this video, guys. I've had so much interaction from you guys from Instagram, and it has been so much fun to just ask questions and get feedback from you all, and so I'm super pumped for this video. So what is about to happen is I've interviewed my pastors from 3Strands Church in McCreary County, Kentucky. They are amazing people, and just who they are is enough to really just shift you as a Christian. So I've interviewed them on their marriage and just the process that they have been through throughout their time of being together, and it is an incredible story, and it changed my life, so I pray that it changes yours. And we are about to get into their interview, and they are going to share so many incredible nuggets of wisdom, and as well as just how beautiful their story is in general.
Our story is packed with like all kinds of craziness, you know, and so a lot of unfaithfulness and prison time and like lack of trust, lack of communication skills. We went through a stretch where like I don't even know if we talked to each other for months. We were just living in the same house, like completely silent. There was a time there where like Stephanie left, didn't even tell me where she was going, just left for 3 days, and I was ticked off, you know, and so like I changed the locks on the doors and I drained the bank accounts. I mean, it was like vicious, bitter kind of stuff. And I remember thinking at that time, like, I want to be divorced. I want to be divorced. But I didn't want to be the guy who said I want to be divorced. So it was like I was kind of secretively hoping she would show up and be like, I'm done, I want out. And she never did that, you know, because she's stubborn. But instead she showed up and said she wanted to apologize to me for stuff that she had done, when at that time, like, I was the one doing everything. Is what it felt like, you know. I was having an affair and being like hateful towards her and just silent and cold shoulder, just mean treatment. And yet like she showed up and said, I just want to apologize. And she had read a book that her mom gave her called Love and Respect. We would highly recommend that book. Emerson Eggerichs is the author's name, called Love and Respect, and he also has a DVD series out on that conference from that same book. But that was where she kind of got that idea of kind of owning her stuff, even if I was guilty of so much, kind of owning her stuff. And we now use that a lot in marriage counseling with people, kind of the idea that in most marriages the fault is usually 50-50. But most people think it's 100% zero. And so what we're trying to get people to see is, even if it's 90% their fault and 10% your fault, even if, could you just own your 10% and trust God to work on their 90%? And if you can do that, then you can like make progress. But as long as you believe that you're perfect and the other person is completely at fault, then there's really no help for that marriage. And so that's kind of where Stephanie came to me at, and kind of owning her 10%.
Which, if I can interrupt, like, I think the thing that amazed me the most in that book, like, I came from a very strong faith-based and like Christian school, church, Bible college all the time, but the ideas for the wife presented in that book is very much based on, I think it's Ephesians 5:32, I think.
33 maybe?
I don't know. But it's this idea of where God says, husbands, love your wives, wives, respect your husbands. And he just listed very specific things that I'd never heard before that were ways to show respect. And I was living the opposite. I didn't know that I was being disrespectful, but just one example from there is like shoulder to shoulder time, like how much just this type of time is valued for a guy, but face to face time is what's valued for me. And so I was always nagging him because we didn't have this kind of time, and he was always upset with me because we didn't have shoulder to shoulder time. And so that was very eye-opening to me. And there were just so many things in that book that God just really used that to show me, like, I had my issues. It had been easy to that point to always try to blame him, and all of a sudden the spotlight was on me.
Yeah, and men in our culture don't understand it either. It's not just women. It's that God presents in the Bible is Ephesians 5:33. I looked it up. But Ephesians 5:33, husbands love your wives and wives respect your husbands. In fact, the language actually says, husbands love your wives and wives you must respect your husbands. And in our culture, that's been taught opposite, differently. in our culture, we've been hammered home the idea that love is unconditional. And everybody knows that. Even if they don't practice it, they all know it. Hey, love is unconditional. A parent's love for their child is supposed to be unconditional. No matter what they do, you love them. But respect is earned. But that isn't what God presents in his word. What God presents in his word is, husbands, love your wives unconditionally, like Jesus loved the church, right? We get that part of it. But the other side is equally true. Wives, respect your husbands unconditionally, whether they deserve it or not. And so that's been like really mistaught in our culture. We've become like a really love-dominated culture. And so the idea of unconditional respect is not taught anywhere really. And so that was like revolutionary for us, I think, as a couple. I wasn't really in a good place to hear that at that time. But luckily, God's grace was greater than my sin. And so he was kind enough to like work us through a long process, getting us in front of the right people, getting us the right information that we now get to like re-gift to other people. Slowly just rebuilt our marriage. It's better than ever now. Like, we're best friends, and like, I can't think of, we were just talking earlier about when it would be like when we're empty nesters. Like, I'm looking forward to that. Like, I think it'd be so cool to just be able to hang out, you know what I mean? Like, so like, I'm very thankful for like what God's been able to work through in our life and bring us in our marriage. So, but and all of that is like exposing all that stuff in us has been like crucial to the way we started our church, because now we teach that, we harp on that stuff at our church, that the Christian life can't be lived silently, separated from everybody else, that it has to be lived connected to everybody else. And a lot of churches say some things like that, but very few are like practicing that.
So, like I said, this week I've taken a ton of Insta polls and asked you all a ton of questions. I had about 2,000 people interact with those things and engage with all of the things that I asked, and I've had about 200 people respond to things, so it has been incredible. I'm so excited. So the first poll was, why is it hard to trust? And I got some pretty consistent answers. I had a ton of answers, and I had two very consistent answers. One was that we seem to live in a cheating culture. Like, our generation just feels that we have this cheating culture that's happening, a lot of lies and deceit that goes on, and so that makes it inevitable to really trust now. So the second response that I had was the fact that we've been burned in the past, y'all. Like, we struggle with trusting because we've been in relationships before where we've really been hurt, and because we're hurt in this past relationship, we bring it all into the next relationship, and we struggle in the trusting process because of the things that have happened before. And so those are two very common answers that we had, which kind of makes sense, So the second question that I asked you all on Instagram was, how do you trust? I was really just curious on what people would say as to how do they actually trust people. And so I had three very consistent answers. One was just jump in. You just have to. Like, you got to jump in and trust the person. The second one talked a lot about how we have to go through a process with someone. It takes a lot of time to trust people, so really just trusting over time. And then the third one, which is my favorite one, was that we don't trust them. Which sounds terrible, but we don't trust the person, but we trust our God. So rather than trusting someone, we're trusting Jesus. And actually, I'm about to show you all a clip from Pastor David Decker and his wife Stephanie, and they kind of go into that topic of, no, you don't trust the person, you trust God. And we're going to take a look at what that process is like in the way that he discusses it.
I sat through a couple weeks ago a class on Generation Z, and one of the things they shared about Generation Z was that they don't trust people. They don't believe that anything in life is permanent, that everything can be changed at any time, taken from them at any time. They don't believe that their family will be there for life, that at any time somebody in their family could abandon them, walk out on them, at any time their job could be shipped overseas, at any time even their gender could change. And so they don't believe anything in life is permanent. And so it's created inside of them a real sense of like, I don't need any commitments to anybody or anything because I don't really believe they're going to last anyhow. And that is, contrary to how a marriage would ever work. You'd never be able to make a marriage work that way. But that generation also doesn't list family as one of their 10 most important keys to a successful life. That's the first generation to ever do that. And so that's sad. Like, that's heartbreaking for them because they're missing out on what real relationship does inside of you, which is gives you like great fulfillment, whether it's your relationship with the Lord or then the people he like filters through you to have a relationship with, wife, children, husband, friends, anybody like that, you know. And so that's a sad commentary on the current generations coming up, but it's on us. Like, I feel like it's on people in Generation X and older to like model for those people what real commitment looks like and the great value that comes from that commitment.
And finally, the last question that I asked you all this week kind of had a poll as well. And the question was, what is better, to be single or to be taken? And it was kind of a difficult question for a lot of you all because you didn't have a specific answer of like, oh, it's this or that. But what I did see was that we were right down the middle. 32 people on this poll told me that they would rather be single. 31 people told me they would rather be in a relationship. And I had about 50 answers, which was crazy, as to why. And honestly, those answers were amazing and they were mind-blowing and I love them. And there was a lot of people that said both are biblical, and I had a ton of people who aren't Christians who just responded and said, if you're healthy and you're dating someone in a healthy way, that is good. But my question for you all isn't what is the healthy way, but it's like, how do we learn the healthy way? And so what we're about to do is, again, listen and hear some things that Pastor David Decker talks about when it comes to dating and how to trust and how to choose the right person to date so that you can actually date if you choose to do so. And disclaimer, I 100% believe in whether you're single, whether you're in a relationship, whether you're single your whole life, whether you get married, no matter what, it's a process. And the whole process of life is to honor Jesus and to become holy. And so in these processes, not one is greater or lower than the other. I believe that the Lord uses both of these seasons of your life, regardless of what that looks like, to honor and glorify Him if you let Him. So regardless of single or dating, like, that's what we're called to do. So let's take a listen to what Pastor Dave has to say about that.
If you're going into marriage and the idea you have is, I have to make a solid commitment to her or to him in order to make this thing work, you're already setting yourself up to fail.
That's good.
That the commitment that has to be made to God. And so it's like, there will be times in your life where she will be super annoying. It just is what it is. You know? And there will be times in your life where like he's an absolute jerk, you know? But it's in those moments where like you have to be able to look past their shoulder and see Jesus standing behind them and say, I'm committed to him, not them. I'm committed to him. And so that commitment is the only thing that will get you through some of those moments. Or else you'll just decide to bail like everybody else is bailing. But so my commitment is not to Stephanie. My commitment is to Jesus. And so like I don't have any vows to Stephanie. When I took vows on our wedding day, those vows are to God. And so when I sin, I'm not sinning against Stephanie. I'm sinning against God. So like Stephanie hasn't created any laws or rules to follow. God has laid out like the blueprint for obedience. And so like when I break rules, when I break laws, I'm violating God's law. Like David said, against you, O Lord, have I sinned. Against you and you alone, O Lord, have I sinned. But yet David like murdered somebody, and didn't he sin against those people? No, he recognized like, no, my sin is against like a holy, infinitely powerful God. And so that's important to understand, because I'm not making a commitment to my spouse, I'm making a commitment to my God. If he really is my God, then I owe him everything. And so that's like the true commitment of marriage, is when you've committed to see it through to the end for your God. And so like marriage then becomes like a petri dish to develop my holiness, not to develop my happiness. And that's from the old book, you know. But it's like where he said like the purpose of marriage is not my happiness, it's my holiness. And so God is like constantly working on me to make me a holier, more Christ-like person. Marriage is the perfect petri dish to make that happen. Nothing will test your patience. Nothing will increase your perseverance or grow your love or your joy more than marriage, even more than kids. Like it's marriage, you know, it's the ultimate petri dish, or the ultimate like experiment that God's using in your life to make you more and more holy. You know, I think that like for all of the like shortcomings that both of us have had in our past and have now, all of the deficiencies in being a good boyfriend or girlfriend that both of us had. The one thing that like I think both of us had was we both passionately loved Jesus. And so like everything else will work out. And that's the non-negotiable. And so when you're like deciding if you're going to go out with somebody for the first time, don't settle for somebody just because they have an air of spirituality about them or they say some of the right things. Like, you better know that person loves Jesus with their whole heart. If you wait until you love them to make that decision, it's too late. Like, so well, I'll go out on some dates with them and then I'll size that up. And you go out, at some point in that relationship, you'll fall in love with them. And you won't be able to control when that happens. So you have to make the decision up front before you even go on the first date. I'm only going to engage with people who are passionately pursuing Jesus. I'm not going to missionary date them. I'm not going to date somebody to try to convert them, to try to mature them in their faith. No, they better love Jesus passionately before they get like one sit down with me, you know? And I think that's the standard like you need to make, or you're going to find yourself falling in love with somebody who doesn't love Jesus passionately, but then it's too late because you've already given them your heart. And now you're stuck. And then you marry that person and you wonder 3 years later why you got divorced. Well, you picked somebody that didn't even love Jesus. And that's what's happening over and over again. People who actually love Jesus are settling for people who don't love Jesus simply because they knew the right Christian words to say. Or they asked them one spiritual question and they said yes. And that's good enough for me because I'm so afraid to be alone. I settle for that as answers. Like, no, like find somebody that loves Jesus with their whole heart.
The verse about the human heart being deceitful and desperately wicked, like who can know it? Like, there's so many people that would say, I'm not afraid of being alone and on my own, or I really want that. Or they'd say, well, we're just friends, we're just hanging out. But like, your heart gets tricked so easy. And so just to be aware of that, and also to just like be accountable to other believers about those relationship choices, and to ask other believers to pray, like, is this a relationship that you think God would lead me into? Asking for their contribution and their prayer on what they think of that relationship and what that would be like. I think those are some pieces I would think about for sure.
Yeah, don't ask your best friend if that's the person you should date, because they love you too much to say anything that's going to hurt your feelings. Ask your pastor, ask your dad, you know what I mean? Like, ask your grandma. Ask those people, what do you think of this person? What do you know about this person? Like, let them, I'm not saying that you should be like in arranged marriages, but I'm just saying, like, try to find somebody who's going to like speak the truth into your life about the person you're considering, not just fall for some like candy coated surfacey answer about Christianity.
And so this next clip is a little bit choppy, and it kind of has a lot happening because we were honestly just in conversation after I finished recording, and we said bye, everything, and he just started spilling some crazy wisdom. So this video clip is like everywhere. There's no focus. It's kind of like all around the room. My camera didn't really want to focus a lot. It was coming in and out. So this is a mess, but oh my gosh, it is a mess of wisdom.
One of the myths a lot of people believe about marriage and just about trust in general is that trust is built on perfection over time. And that's inaccurate. And they wouldn't call it perfection over time. But if you ask them, like, well, say you're meeting with a couple and the husband's cheated on the wife, and you say, well, you got to rebuild trust, right? So you say to her, like, well, how do you rebuild trust? And she would say, well, he has to never do it again, right? He has to never do it again. Okay, so you're saying if he never does it again, then at some point down the road you'll trust him. Yeah, at some point down the road I'll trust him. When? When is that point? I don't know, but I'll know when it comes. Okay, so if he never has another affair, but 6 months from now you see him like flirting with another girl, do you trust him now, or is trust broken again? Well, trust is broken again. Well, he didn't have an affair. What happened? Well, he wasn't perfect, see? So what about like 3 months after that, when you get to walking down the hall in the mall with them and you see him give a girl like a look? He didn't even say, how do you trust him? No, now you still don't trust him. Why? Because you've set up the standard as trust is actually his sexual perfection over time. I'll trust him then. But that's a standard that's unachievable. That some point in your husband's life moving forward, whether he wants to be faithful or not, he will have a lustful thought about somebody else. Because we're sinful, right? And so you've set him up for a standard that he can't keep, so he can never regain your trust. And so he's forced to either live in distrust with you or to lie about it, right? And that's what's going on. Real trust is built on honesty over time. Maybe you came into the relationship with trust issues from previous relationships. It isn't even about your current boyfriend or girlfriend or your current spouse, but it's about like a previous relationship that was abusive or sexually unfaithful or whatever. And so now you're like, you can't trust the current person because of a past person. And so like in that relationship, what you want to try and set up in that relationship is not a standard of perfection. Oh, I trust them because they're better than the last person. No, that's an impossible standard to achieve long term. What you want to set up is a relationship where the new person can be fully honest with you. Okay? You can be fully honest with me. If you're having thoughts about another girl, tell me. Maybe it will end our relationship. I can't guarantee it won't. But I want you to believe that honesty is always better than a lie. And that's where trust is built. Trust is built on honesty over time. And so the more you lie, the less trust there will be. Even subconsciously, you'll feel distrust amongst each other. And so you have to create a relationship where you're free. Like, build a relationship that is built on honesty, not perfection. Honesty is more important than perfection. Perfection is an unachievable goal. But honesty is an achievable goal. And so it's like, man, you got to be able to be in an environment where you can be completely honest, completely real, completely known, and still fully loved. And that's what God's grace is. God's grace is that you are fully known, but still fully loved. If you're fully loved, but not fully known, that's a delusion. That's a fantasy you're living in. If you're fully known, but not fully loved, that's rejection. And you can't succeed in life if you're in a relationship that's based on rejection or based on fantasy. But you can succeed in a relationship that's based on grace. And grace is when you're fully known and still fully loved. So be fully known with each other. Hey, maybe they can't live with what they know about you and they got to end the relationship. But I promise you that's better than waiting till you've been married for 10 years and then ending the relationship. So get fully known, and if they still love you anyhow, then they might be a keeper, you know? But if they know everything about you and you know everything about them, and you still love each other fully, that's grace. And God can build a relationship off of that grace.
40 to 50% of marriages end in divorce in the United States. So let's not be a part of that statistic. Let's be the generation that stands up and chooses to commit, chooses to understand how to trust, chooses to choose Christ over another person, and chooses to date the right way, because dating leads to marriage. Let's beat the statistics. Love y'all.